Good morning, Lisbon. Good morning, Actuar and Fian France from Portugal, distinguished guests. First of all, congratulations to you all organizing this event discussing existing legislation and future right to food law in Portugal. This is timely and important initiative. As you know, there's no country in Europe having a constitutional principle or framework law to promote right to food in their legal system. Scotland has an initiative called Good Food Law, still is going on last 2 years, and recently in UK NGOs, some political parties and unions are discussing similar initiative aftermath of the Brexit. I'm involved in these two initiatives to support to realize right to food as much as I can. However, there's no clear development so far in Europe to promote right to food in national level. I'm hoping that maybe Portugal will be the first country in Europe to legislate right to food and will be pioneer to other European countries. Although Europe is the most human rights friendly continent in the world, and a major political player of the developed world, economic, social, and cultural rights is not considered a priority. Most of the European countries promote right to food as part of overseas development matter to support agricultural investment and food assistance to developing countries, considering that internally there is no food insecurity issue in their own backyards. However, Europe, unlike the general belief, is the home of the almost 48 million food insecure people, the figure that increased since 2008 financial crisis and still continue not only in southern Europe such as Spain, Portugal and Greece, but even in UK. Nearly 1 in 5 UK children under 15 lives in a home where the parents cannot afford to put food on the table. According to a study from University of Porto, 1 in 9 young adults are food insecure in Portugal. Young adults are considerable greater risk of food insecurity in Portugal. The food insecurity is also associated with obesity and other non-communicable diseases such as diabetes and hypertension. Recent studies show that rising food insecurity is strongly associated not just with malnutrition, but with sustained deterioration of mental health. Austerity measures unfortunately cut many of the social protection systems in Europe and left alone people that needs to be supported. Mostly rural areas generally are forgotten compared to city dwellers. This is the case in Portugal. As we know, rural part of the country is significantly poor than the capital and other cities because of lack of job opportunity and significant difficulty to sustain the impact of common agricultural policy of the Europe. Family farmers, the backbone of Portuguese society, are disappearing and only old generation left out and left behind in their villages. In recent years, the sad story became world news with horrifying pictures shown to the world that aging villagers were the victim of the wildfires due to climate change, induced extreme weather events, unprecedented drought that destroyed environment. This should not happen in Portugal. Portugal was traditionally an agricultural country with highly specialized, good quality production. However, after the EU Common Agricultural Policies, Portugal, like many other developing countries, has become dependent of the larger international trade and economic policies that push farmers more export-oriented agriculture rather than local production, family and local consumption-oriented food and agricultural system. This was the end of sovereignty, food sovereignty, for many countries, including Portugal. Local food production and consumption model are not struggling or already are now struggling or already lost the battle. We are not only losing the farmers that they cannot compete with cheaper but lower quality, higher quantity of foods, they lost their livelihood and they lost their health, to exposing themselves global supermarket chains that feed us excessive salt, sugar, and saturated fat, simply junk foods, what we call. So what should be done in such a situation that even economic recovery is somewhat on the way, but growing inequality between rural and city, between men and women, and income inequality still continue because of non-inclusive economic growth policies and lack of legal and institutional system to respect, protect, and fulfill the right to food. So what is right to food? Most of the time, right to food is confused with food security and interpreted as charity activities such as opening soup kitchens and food banks to give food aid to vulnerable groups. These are nothing to do with right to food. Right to food is a legal entitlement for the citizen and duty for states. Universal Declaration of Human Rights, Article 25, and subsequent International Covenant of the Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights, Article 11, clearly articulates this right. Here are some policy recommendations. First, the right to food requires that food be available, accessible, and adequate. This means that all people at all times must be able to produce or obtain from markets enough food that is only nutritionally sufficient and which is culturally appropriate and safe, which means either they produce or they go to market to buy it. Most of the time, availability is not an issue around the world, but accessibility and adequacy is. In case of Portugal, I think restorative measures are necessary to revitalize family farming against industrialization food system and returning to food sovereignty and promotion of local food, which helps health and economic recovery also. This needs legal and institutional structure as well as financial sources and, more importantly, political will. 2, the right to food must also be sustainable so that present enjoyment of the right does not interfere with the ability of future generations to enjoy available, accessible, and adequate food. This simply could be realized by returning family farming and agroecological practices. 3, the right to food should not be construed narrowly, but as universal, interdependent, interrelated, and indivisible with all other human rights. Consider the right to health, the clean drinking water and sanitation, social security, education, freedom of association, and access to justice. These rights depend on and enable the enjoyment of the right to food. In order to do this, all ministerial bodies should work together: health, education, farming, environment, and of course, trade and finance. Any initiatives for policy and law should be discussed widely with all partners. The decision-making mechanism must be available and transparent to all. 5, the framework law must support family farming, which is generally in Portugal represents subsistence farmers, should be incentivized and supported to connect with local food distribution that farmers are able to access the market for their production easily. So the procurement mechanisms help the family farmers and healthy food that could be distributed to school feeding programs, hospitals, and other governmental institutions. But for this, an effective mechanism should be established by the government. This would be helpful to fight against rural poverty, food insecurity, and malnutrition, as well as protection of environment. 6, finally, all legal structure should have a monitoring and accountability mechanisms that citizens would be able to question the decisions and policies if there's a discrimination, injustice, or if the system does not prioritize the most vulnerable first. I think Establishing a legal and institutional structure based on these principles will give a good start to Portugal to recover and restore again the healthy national good food policy and a model of right to food in Europe. Thank you.